You're listening to the Archetype Effect, conversations redefining power, purpose and leadership for women and the coaches who guide them. I'm Ros Cardinal, leadership coach and creator of the Women's Leader Archetypes. Together we'll explore the real stories, the research and reflections that help women rise with clarity and authentic power. If you've been listening along this season, you might have noticed something. In episode 1, we talked about why leadership often feels misaligned for women, why doing all the right things can still feel exhausting or inauthentic. In episode 2, we named the archetypes, the patterns of power, influence and leadership that live inside you. And in episode 3, we explored shadow, not as a flaw, but as a protective response when safety, authority, influence or belonging feels threatened. And somewhere across these episodes, a quiet question tends to surface. If I can see these patterns, why do they keep happening? Why do I still withdraw, even when I know better? Why do I still overfunction, even when I'm tired? Why do I still hold on, overgive, or disappear, even with all this awareness? This is where the nervous system comes in, because most leadership advice speaks to the mind, but shadow doesn't live in the mind. Shadow lives in the body. And if you've ever tried to think your way out of a pattern that keeps repeating, this episode is for you. Today isn't about learning a new model. It's about understanding what's been running quietly underneath everything we've already named. Because once you understand the nervous system, something important happens. You stop interpreting your responses as personal failure, and you start seeing them as intelligent protection. Not something to override, something to work with. When people hear the words nervous system, they often expect complexity, technical language, diagrams, something they need to get right. But at its most basic level, your nervous system has one core job: to keep you safe. It's your internal radar. It's constantly scanning, not just for physical danger, but for relational and psychological threat. Things like, am I safe to speak here? Am I at risk of being judged? Will I lose credibility if I say this? Do I belong in this room? Long before your conscious mind weighs in, your body is already answering those questions, and it answers them through state. When the system senses safety, you feel present, curious, capable, open. When it senses threat, it moves into protection. Not because you're weak, but because that's what it's designed to do. This is why insight alone doesn't always create change. You can know something intellectually and still feel unable to act differently because the body is prioritizing safety over logic. Leadership environments are particularly challenging for nervous systems. They require visibility, decision-making, responsibility, influence, all under observation. And for many women, leadership also requires something else: vigilance. Reading the room, tracking reactions, monitoring tone, timing, perception. That level of attunement is not a mindset issue, it's a nervous system load. So when we talk about confidence dropping or patterns repeating or energy draining, we're often not talking about capability at all. We're talking about regulation, or the absence of it. One of the reasons this is so confusing for women is that dysregulation doesn't always look dramatic. You don't have to be panicking, overwhelmed, or visibly anxious for your nervous system to be under strain. In fact, many women stay highly functional while dysregulated. They keep delivering, they keep performing, they keep meeting expectations. And because things are still getting done, it's easy to assume the problem must be internal. Why am I so tired if nothing is technically wrong? Why does this feel harder than it should? Why do I feel on edge even when things are going well? What's often happening underneath is not stress in the moment, it's sustained vigilance over time. Leadership requires presence, but for many women, it also requires constant monitoring. Am I being too much? Not enough? Too direct? Too quiet? Too emotional? Too detached? That ongoing self-surveillance keeps the nervous system alert, even in environments that look fine from the outside. That's why rest doesn't always restore. You can take time off, slow down, even enjoy yourself, and still feel like something hasn't quite settled. Because regulation isn't about stopping activity, it's about restoring a felt sense of safety. And safety isn't just the absence of threat, it's the presence of permission. Permission to speak without bracing, permission to decide without second guessing, permission to take up space without scanning for consequences. When that permission is missing, the nervous system compensates. It finds ways to stay protected. And that's where shadow begins to take shape. Not as a conscious choice, but as a bodily response to environments that demand too much alertness for too long. In the last episode, we named shadow patterns: the hermit, the tyrant, the lone wolf, the martyr. Today, I want to look at them again, not as personality traits, but as nervous system states. Because when the body perceives threat, it looks for safety, and it tends to do that in familiar ways. Let's walk through them gently. The hermit is a freeze response. When authority feels unsafe, when your ideas are dismissed, your leadership questioned, or the emotional demand feels too much, the system shuts down. Energy drops, decision stalls, engagement feels impossible. This isn't rest, it's overwhelm. From the outside, it can look like procrastination or disengagement. From the inside, it feels like, I can't cope. The hermit isn't avoiding leadership, she's protecting herself by becoming invisible. The tyrant is a flight response, but it's not running away, it's running forward. This is the nervous system saying, if I stay in motion, I'll be safe. The tyrant stays busy, she delivers, she keeps everything moving, because motion creates control. If I'm producing, I can't be questioned. If I keep things moving, nothing can collapse. Control here is about task and output. This is why the tyrant often appears as competence until exhaustion sets in. She isn't driven by dominance. She's driven by the need to keep threat at bay through momentum. The lone wolf is a fight response, but not aggression, containment. When influence or credibility feels threatened, the system tightens. The lone wolf hunkers down. She pulls information inward. She limits access. Because control over knowledge equals safety. If I hold the full picture, I can't be undermined. If I manage information, I stay relevant. This is not withdrawal, it's guarding. Control here is about information and influence, not people. And finally, the martyr is a fawn response. Safety through harmony, through attunement, through meeting others' needs. When belonging feels conditional, the system says, don't disrupt, don't take up space, keep everyone okay. The martyr doesn't overgive because she lacks boundaries. She overgives because connection feels essential to safety. Seen through this lens, shadow stops being confusing. It becomes logical. These are not character flaws. They're the body doing its job, just in environments that require too much vigilance for too long. Before we move on, it's worth slowing down here. Because when we talk about nervous system states, it can still sound abstract, even when the language is human. So let's stay with what these states actually feel like when you're living inside them. Not in crisis, not at breaking point, just going about your day, doing your work, leading your life. When the hermit is active, it doesn't always feel dramatic. It often feels like a quiet pulling back. Your calendar feels heavier than it used to. Decisions that once felt simple now feel challenging. You delay conversations, not because you don't care, but because you can't quite find the energy to engage. You might tell yourself you're tired or busy or that you'll deal with it later, but underneath, there's often a sense of too much. Too many demands, too much expectation, too much exposure. So the system narrows, not to rest, but to survive. When the tyrant is active, it often feels like competence under pressure. You're doing things, delivering, holding it together. There's movement, sometimes constant movement. Your mind stays busy, your task list stays full. Slowing down feels uncomfortable, even risky. Because when things are moving, you feel steadier. Stopping would mean feeling what you've been outrunning, so you stay in motion. From the outside, this can look like confidence or drive. From the inside, it often feels like, I can't afford to stop. When the lone wolf is active, the world starts to feel unpredictable. You notice yourself tightening. You think more than you speak. You share less than you know. You hold the bigger picture quietly. Not because you want distance, but because proximity feels unsafe. There's a sense that being fully transparent might cost you influence, that being too open could expose you. So information gets contained. You stay present, but guarded, capable, but alone. And when the martyr is active, attention moves outward. You track others' needs before your own. You adjust, you accommodate. You might feel useful, even valued, but also strangely invisible. There's often a low-level exhaustion here, not from doing too much, but from not being able to stop doing. Because pausing feels like letting someone down, and letting someone down feels unsafe. What's important to note is that none of these states feel like failure from the inside. They feel like coping. They're the body's way of staying oriented in environments that require constant alertness. And many women move between these states without realising it. Hermit in one week, tyrant the next. Lone wolf in one context, martyr in another. Not because they're inconsistent, but because their system is responding intelligently to different pressures. When you start to recognise these states as responses, not identity, something softens. There's less self-judgment, less urgency to fix, and more curiosity about what your body's been carrying, often quietly, for a very long time. One of the reasons this conversation matters so deeply for women is that our nervous systems are rarely operating in neutral conditions. Many women don't just lead, they monitor while they lead. They track tone, they read the room, they anticipate reactions before they happen. This isn't overthinking, it's vigilance. And vigilance is expensive. From an early age, many women are taught, implicitly or explicitly, that safety lives in awareness, that being liked matters, that being attuned matters, that knowing how others are feeling is a form of responsibility. So by the time women step into leadership, they often arrive with highly developed relational intelligence and nervous systems that are already used to scanning. Leadership then adds another layer: visibility, authority, decision-making, influence, all under observation. And when leadership environments are unclear, politicised, or subtly hostile, the nervous system doesn't relax, it escalates. Not into panic, into alertness. This is why so many women can appear calm and capable on the outside while feeling tense or depleted on the inside. Their system is doing two jobs at once: leading, watching for consequences. And when safety feels conditional, when authority is granted only if you behave correctly, speak carefully, or stay palatable, the body adapts. It learns that rest is risky, that slowing down might invite scrutiny, that visibility comes with a cost. So instead of settling, the system stays on. This is why so much of the advice women receive around confidence simply doesn't land. Just be more assertive, take up more space, stop doubting yourself. Those instructions assume safety. But when safety hasn't been established, the nervous system hears those messages as dangerous and it responds accordingly. By pulling back, by overfunctioning, by controlling, by pleasing. Not because women lack courage, but because their systems are prioritising survival over expression. This is not a personal deficit. It's a context-aware response. This is where we need to be very careful with language, because the moment we talk about nervous systems, regulation often gets collapsed into self-care. Bubble baths, time off, switching off. Those things can be supportive, but they're not what regulation actually is. Regulation isn't about escaping leadership. It's about having enough internal safety to stay present with it. A regulated nervous system doesn't mean you're calm all the time. It means you have capacity. Capacity to think clearly under pressure, capacity to stay connected without self-erasing, capacity to act without bracing. Regulation is what allows choice to return. Without regulation, leadership becomes reactive. You don't choose how you respond, your system does it for you. You withdraw before you've decided. You control before you've reflected. You overgive before you've checked your own needs. Not because you want to, but because the body has decided that safety comes first. This is why regulation is not indulgent, it's foundational. A regulated leader holds boundaries without aggression, makes decisions without urgency, stays visible without performing, and allows influence without over-control. Not because she's trying harder, but because her system isn't operating from threat. One of the simplest ways to understand regulation is to notice what changes when it's missing. Leadership from dysregulation often feels urgent. Decisions need to be made quickly, not because the situation truly requires it, but because staying with uncertainty feels intolerable. Silence gets filled, pauses feel risky. There's a sense that if you don't act now, something will go wrong. Influence in this state tends to come with effort. You explain more than necessary, you justify your thinking, you work harder to bring people with you. Not because your ideas aren't sound, but because your system doesn't feel settled enough to let them stand on their own. Boundaries in dysregulation are either rigid or porous. You might hold on tightly, controlling the scope, the process or information, because letting go feels unsafe. Or you might give too much, saying yes, absorbing extra responsibility, because conflict feels threatening. Either way, leadership becomes something you manage rather than inhabit. By contrast, leadership from regulation feels slower, even when things are moving. There's a space between stimulus and response. You don't need to fill every gap or resolve every tension immediately. You can sit with not knowing, without collapsing or overcompensating. Decisions come from clarity rather than urgency. When regulated, you don't need to prove your authority. You speak less and land more. You trust timing. You allow others to step forward without feeling that your relevance is at risk. Boundaries also change. They become quieter. You don't need to defend them aggressively or negotiate them endlessly. They're held internally before they're expressed externally. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of leadership power. From the outside, regulated leadership can look understated, but it carries weight. People feel steadier around you. Conversations slow down. Complexity becomes easier to hold. Not because you're managing the room, but because your system isn't transmitting threat. This is why regulation isn't about being calm. You can be regulated and passionate, regulated and decisive, regulated and firm. What changes is not the intensity, but coherence. Your words, actions and presence align. And that alignment is felt. It's also why regulation can't be forced. You can't think your way into it. You can't discipline yourself into it. It emerges when safety is restored, internally and externally. When the body no longer believes it has to protect you at all costs, leadership shifts from performance to presence. And from that place, power stops feeling brittle. It starts becoming sustainable. This is also why regulation precedes boundaries. We often tell women to set better boundaries, but boundaries are difficult to hold when the nervous system is dysregulated. If your system believes connection equals safety, you'll fawn. If your system believes output equals safety, you'll overwork. If your system believes control equals safety, you'll tighten. Regulation doesn't force different behaviour, it makes different behaviour possible. And this is where leadership shifts from effort to embodiment, because power that comes from a regulated place feels different. It's steadier, less performative, less exhausting. It doesn't require constant monitoring or self-correction. It simply is. Once you start seeing leadership through this lens, something changes. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And you start asking, what does my system need to feel safe enough to lead from my centre? This reframes the entire conversation. Withdrawal becomes information. Control becomes a signal. Overgiving becomes communication. Not things to eliminate, but messages to listen to. When safety is restored, shadow softens naturally. The hermit doesn't need to disappear. The tyrant doesn't need to stay in motion. The lone wolf doesn't need to guard so tightly. The martyr doesn't need to erase herself. Not because they're corrected, but because their job is done. This is how power returns, not through force, not through discipline, but through permission. Permission to slow without losing authority. Permission to be visible without bracing. Permission to lead without scanning for danger. And this is where the sovereign begins to re-emerge. Because the sovereign is not about dominance. She's about authorship. She knows who she is, what she stands for, what matters. She doesn't need to prove her authority. She inhabits it. When authority feels unsafe, the sovereign retreats. She hands her power to shadow its protection. One of the most misunderstood experiences in women's leadership is what happens when authority starts to feel unstable. From the outside, it often looks like confidence has disappeared. Ambition has waned. Something essential has been lost. But from the inside, it rarely feels like failure. It feels like caution, like something that once felt solid is no longer reliable. Like the ground has shifted, quietly, subtly, and your system has noticed before your mind has caught up. This is where many women begin to question themselves. They wonder why they don't feel as decisive, why they hesitate before speaking, why leading now seems to cost more than it once did. And too often the explanation they reach for is personal. Maybe I'm not cut out for this anymore. Maybe I've changed. Maybe I don't want this as much as I thought. But what's often happening is simpler and kinder. Authority has stopped feeling safe. When values are compromised, when influence is undermined, when legitimacy is quietly eroded, the system responds. Not by fighting, not by proving, but by retreating. This retreat isn't weakness, it's protection. And when we misread it as a lack of confidence, we push women towards solutions that don't fit. Confidence training, visibility strategies, mindset work. When what's actually needed is a restoration of inner permission. Because authority doesn't return through force, it returns when safety is rebuilt. When a woman can once again stand in who she is, what she values, and what she authorises herself to lead, without bracing for consequence, that's not about becoming someone new, it's about coming back to centre. And that's where we're going next. So in the next episode, we're going to slow right down and explore that moment. What happens when authority collapses? What does retreat really look like? And how does the sovereign return, not through effort, but through restored inner permission? We'll begin with the bedrock of the entire archetypal system. Sovereign and hermit, from retreat to reign. Thanks for joining me on the Archetype Effect. If this episode sparked an insight, share it with a woman who leads, or leave a review so more women can find these conversations. Until next time, lead with purpose and power that feels like you.